Our Heavenly Father, we ask this evening that as we open up your word, that you will um, illuminate it for us, that the Holy Spirit will be our teacher, that our eyes and our ears will be opened to hear what you have for us this day, that we might be sensitive to it and obedient as well. We come before you in confidence, knowing that you will hear us, that you will answer our prayers, yes, no, or wait. We come in the strong name of our Savior, your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, no class next week. It's Father's Day, so we took off for mothers. We're going to take off for fathers, and although we know it's not the same thing, so that's fine. I get it. A wise man once told me that um, when you get married, you're number one. When you have kids, you start moving down the pecking order, and don't fight for number one because you'll lose. so, so, all right. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 25. One of the purposes of this chapter is to tie up loose ends before we move on. And the loose ends are concerning Ishmael before we move on to Isaac and Jacob and Esau and all the important people, I suppose you might refer to them as. So this is a chapter where all of the potential heirs are dealt with and sent away. And we believe this all happened while Abraham was alive. He did not wait to do this until he was dead and leave it to some poor executor. So he took care of it while he was living. And so all of the potential heirs are dealt with and sent away. Genesis has Genesis 25, verses 1 through 34. I'm reading, I think, out of the New King James this time. I think I pasted correctly this time. I got about a third of the way through with the these and the thous and went, Right? Okay. Abraham, again, took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. Now, this is the kind of passage you like to farm out to your students, just to watch them. And the sons of Dedan were Ashiram, Letushim, and Lumim. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah, and Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, and while he was still living, he sent them eastward away from Isaac his son to the country of the east. And as we have discussed ad nauseum, when you're heading east, you're heading away from God. Verse 7, this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass, after the death of Abraham, that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahairoi. That's the well that is named God Hears. Now this is the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's sons, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maidservant, bore to Abraham. And these were the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, then Kedar, Abil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. And this is normally where the class applauds, but never mind. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these were their names by their towns and their settlements, 12 princes according to their nations. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt as you go toward Assyria. He died in the presence of all his brethren. This is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now, Mike, this morning we talked about Bible time. Okay? We will introduce you to Bible time. We just read verse 20. Verse 21. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. There are 20 years between verse 20 and 21. That is Bible time. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red. So he was a ginger. He was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Esau means hairy. Red, the word for red is Edom. And so later on, when you read about the Edomites, they are the progeny of Esau, or Edom, as he was also called. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die. So what is the birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So in verse 1 here, we have the fact that Abraham lives 38 more years after the death of Sarah. So, in 1 Chronicles 1:32, Keturah is called Abraham's concubine. Now, that does not carry the meaning then that it carries now. It carries a somewhat nefarious meaning today, but it did not necessarily mean that in that day and age. It was simply a term for a secondary wife or a common law wife, but a wife nonetheless. And the word concubine was to delineate status of wives, as in the first wife, second wife, first wife, 23rd wife, first wife. In the case of Solomon, 1,000th wife, So, all right. 1 Chronicles 1:32. You are welcome. Keturah is called Abraham's concubine. She bore him 6 sons. It is improbable. Now, one commentator says she is referred as his concubine because he married her while Sarah was still alive. After the mess with Hagar, I highly doubt that. Okay? And he lived 38 years after the death of Sarah. It was 3 years after her death that Isaac and Rebekah met and were wed. So he's got plenty of time to marry another woman and have 6 sons. And that's just the sons. That doesn't speak to how many possible daughters he may or may not have had. All right. So the pulpit commentary ponders the following point: since the patriarch's body was 100 years was practically dead, as so the scriptures say, it is almost certain that his marriage with Keturah took place after the renewal of his powers, enabling he and Sarah to have Isaac. And it is easier to suppose that his physical vigor remained for some years after Sarah's death than that with his former experience of concubinage, meaning Hagar, that he would take another yet concubine or secondary wife while Sarah yet lived. And I don't see that happening. I mean, he made some bad decisions, but I don't think he was stupid, right? And that may have been had to have been the case had he done that yet again. Okay. Verse 2, and she bore him these 6 sons. Of the children of Keturah, Midian is the most familiar to modern Bible reading people. In the Pentateuch, the Midianites initially have a neutral standing, and it is a term for Bedouins. So when it says that the Midianites came and Joseph's 10 brothers sold him into the hands of the Midianites, they may or may not have been truly Midianites. They may have been just Bedouins traveling from point A to point B, but in either case, buying slaves was not that big a deal. It was not that uncommon, and there was pretty much nothing intrinsically evil or wrong about it. You'll see throughout God's scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, that there's no admonition against having slaves, but there are rules on how you treat them. There's rules on how you treat Hebrew slaves, and there are different rules on how you treat non-Hebrew or Gentile slaves. So, all right. Then they go from maybe a neutral standing to maybe a positive standing, and that Moses married the daughter of a Midianite priest, spent 40 years in Midian. By the end of the period, however, they are in collusion with the Moabites in the disaster of Baal Peor. You know what happened there? So Baal Peor is where. So there's this king named Balak, and he hires this prophet, this mercenary prophet for sale, to curse the Israelites. And so he talks with God, and God says, you better not. So he goes to the king, and he says, I can't say anything bad about him. God won't let me. So that upset the king. So a couple times, Balaam has this chat with God, and God says, no. So he goes to the king, and he says, I can't curse them. I can't outright curse them. And so the king Balak says, well, what are we going to do? And Balaam says, well, I got an idea. And his idea was to have the Gentile women marry into the Israelite encampment and bring their idols and stuff like that with them. And so it was at Baal Peor that Israel fell to this idolatry, this plan of idolatry that Balaam set forth. And you see his name live in infamy all the way throughout the Bible up until the book of Revelation. So, there you go. So their status as anti-Israeli is affirmed by Moses. And if you want to read something very disturbing, you can find this in Numbers chapter 31, where Moses instructs Israel to wreak vengeance on the Midianites. So 1,000 Israelites from each of the 12 tribes muster together, 12,000 men, and they march into Midian. They're led by Phinehas, the son of Eleazar. They kill every male. They kill 5 kings. They kill Balaam. They took captive women and their little ones, cattle, flocks, and goods. They burned all the cities of Midian. They took, they brought all the plunder to Moses, and Moses was angry. And Moses was angry because they had brought the women who had caused the Israelites to worship idols. And his fix for that was to kill the women and their children, especially their male children. So they went ahead and did that too. They were allowed to keep all of the plunder and later divide it between the people who went and made war and the people who stayed home and guarded the home encampment. But they were allowed, the only people they were allowed to keep were the girls who had not yet known a man. So they were allowed to keep the virgin girls. This is all in chapter 31 of, did I say Deuteronomy or Numbers? It's Numbers. The list goes on to tell us that the number of virgin girls they were allowed to keep were 32,000. 32,000 virgin girls, meaning that was the remnant of the nation and people of Midian. And so how many more tens or hundreds of thousands of people perished in the vengeance meted out by Moses? They list the plunder at 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 virgins. Then the taxes had to do with if you were part of the 12,000 that went, your tax was 1 in 500. And if you're part of the group that stayed, your tax was 1 in 50. So the group that stayed paid 10 times more tax than the group that went. The amazing thing is toward the end of that chapter, the commander, maybe Phinehas, comes to Moses and said, we've done a census, we've counted heads, and of the 12,000 men that went and did all this killing and all this warring and all this looting and all this burning, we didn't lose a single guy. Okay, so that's Midian. We are more familiar with Midian than maybe any of the other 6 children of Keturah. Verses 3 and 4, Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were these 3 guys, and the sons of Midian were those guys. Verse 5, and Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had, and while he was still living, he sent them eastward. All right. These are one-time, probably very substantial gifts, presents. They were not part of an ongoing inheritance, such as Isaac would have been a beneficiary of. We will see later on that God transfers, for lack of a better word, the Abrahamic covenant now to Isaac. And later on, we will see it transferred yet again to Jacob. So many have tried to locate the descendants of the 6 sons of Abraham that Abraham begot through Keturah, but much has been not much has been established with certainty. Only the children of the 2 sons that mentioned, Jokshan and Midian, were able to do anything with archaeologically. The point of the story is that Isaac is Ishmael's only heir. I don't know if getting a gift entitles you to be called an heir, but yeah, yeah. So Isaac is Abraham's only heir. We see that later as the responsibility for the covenant is transferred to him. Okay, verse 7. This is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 175 years. So that's how old he was when he was gathered to his people. And Abraham presumably did all of this gift giving and heir transference while he was alive. He didn't wait until he died for things to be worked out. He did this, we believe, in order that there would be no disputes after his death whatsoever as to what was to go to Isaac and what was to go to his other sons. He divided his inheritance while he yet lived. He gave the other gifts and then sent them away. And again, we notice that he sent them eastward. So by eastward, what he meant for them to do was get out of Canaan. So when it says he sent them eastward, he expected them to go across the Jordan over into the land of what at that point was probably still belonged to the Moabites and the Ammonites. So later on in the wars of Joshua, those two people groups were subdued, and that area, that Transjordan, that's what was referred to, Transjordan, across the Jordan, were bequeathed to Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Okay. Let's see. What else we got? His death here is related, though he lived till Jacob and Esau were 15 years of age. Okay, so he got to see his great-grandsons before the father of the faithful and the friend of God died. Isaac at this point is now 75 years old. So it says, and we will get to this, we haven't quite reached the portion in 25 where it speaks to the toldot of Isaac, because the author has not quite gotten rid of all the heirs. He needs to address the toldot of Ishmael, which is the shortest of the 11 that we have recorded. And then he gets to the toldot, or, right, as we remember, the generations, or what became of. All right, so that's what toldot means. What became of Ishmael. And there's 8 or 10 verses. And then what became of Ishmael, and it's much longer and much more detailed. In fact, it goes for several chapters. Is there a question? No? Okay. All right. So Isaac is 75 years old when his dad dies. Verse 8, then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. The event of being gathered to one's people is an introduction to faith in the afterlife. It's always distinguished from the act of burial. So he was buried in the cave in Machpelah with Sarah. It was the only piece of ground that he actually had a title deed to in the promised land. So that's where he was buried. That's where he was bodily buried, but who he is and who he was and who he continues to be was gathered to his people. And by that, it doesn't mean his people who were died and buried in Ur or Haran or any other place. So this is the spiritual aspect of death being shown here to us through the verbiage of the Hebrew. So it goes on to say this cannot be speaking of his physical interment because he was not put together physically with his people. He was put together with Sarah. Physically, these people were in Mesopotamia, and the family burial plot was either in Haran or Ur. So he was buried in the land of promise. He was buried in the only piece of ground that he owned by faith. Verse 9. And his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite. So Abraham's remains, as we said, were put in the ground in the only place in the promised land that he actually had a title deed to. And we see here his spirit and soul went to the place where he became the symbol of rest for all who had ever put their trust in God. Luke chapter 16, Jesus says, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom. Jesus mentions Abraham first when he talks about heaven. Matthew 8:11, it says, I say to you that many will come from the east and from the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So that's one of God's favorite titles for himself, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Another one he uses very frequently is, I am the God that led you out of captivity in Egypt. And we think he uses that one because that title demands that you go back to that whole process of the 10 miracles or the 10 plagues that God laid not only on the nation but the kingdom of Egypt in order to free his people from 430 years of bondage in Egypt. So he uses that a lot of himself. I am the God who led you out of Egypt. So the fact that Abraham is alive and he is proof of his resurrection, we learn also from the book of Matthew. Matthew 22:32, Luke 20, verse 38, and Luke 16. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I am the God of the living, not the God of the dead. Okay. Verses 10 and 11. The field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. That's where Abraham and Sarah are currently buried. There will be a bunch more people buried there eventually. Verse 11, it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahai Roi. You notice, do you not, the absence of any blessing for Ishmael. He's got what he's going to get, and he's told to go. And when we got to that, we talked about possibly the typology of Isaac being the spiritual man, being the man of that has had the breath of life breathed into him, and Ishmael being the old man, and the old man is told to go because the two cannot cohabitate. Okay. We will see here later that Ishmael is described in the New Testament as a profane man. That's not good. In fact, that's worse than not good. All right, verses 12 through 18. 6 whole verses give us the Toldot of Ishmael. It is the 7th and the shortest of all the Toldots. I think there are 11 of them. This is another case of the narrator pursuing the unimportant line and drawing it to a conclusion before coming back and discussing the line he is interested in following, the line of promise. Before passing to the line of the promised seed, the historian here gives a brief 6 verses, brief notice of Ishmael to show that the promises respecting that son of Abraham have been fulfilled, done. You were promised Abraham. Remember, Abraham when God says, I want you to take your son, which son? Your only son. Well, I have two only sons. I have an only son through this woman and an only son through this woman. Well, the son you love. Well, which son? Because I love them both. Okay, your son Isaac. All right, we finally get down to that. Your son Isaac. So that's the only son. That's the only son that mattered to God. It is the only. It is the seed son. It is the son of promise. It is the only son that even garners recognition by the Holy Spirit, who authored our text. Take your son, your only son, in whom you love. Okay. And when all of that was made clear to Abraham and Sarah that he was the promised son, not this son you two cooked up, not this son you two have had your hopes and dreams in for the last 12, 13, 15 years. No, this guy. And so with the introduction of the son of faith, there is turmoil in the family. Sound familiar? Yeah, right. And so it's a heartbreaking situation for Abraham, because for this many years, we think his hope was in Ishmael. God promised a son, here's the son, and she is way past bearing another kid. So this must be the guy. No, it wasn't the guy, right? So God puts us in a position where we see no way out except through him. If you haven't been there yet, you will, because that's how God works. He kicks this crutch out from under us, and he kicks that crutch out from under us until we're teetering and wondering what's going to keep us from falling on our face. And then, and oftentimes only then, do we reach out and grab a hold of him. We ain't too smart, are we? Seems to be the way it has to work. Okay. We go all the way down to verse 16. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these were their names by their towns and their settlements, 12 princes according to their nations. That was the promise God made with Abraham when he said, Isaac is my man. He says, what about Ishmael? Is he going to be part of this too? And God's reply to that was one word. No. What do you mean? No. Right? I'll bless him, but he's not going to be part of this. And so he was blessed. He was blessed with 12 sons who became 12 nations. Okay? All right. So the promise that God made to Abraham was fulfilled. Yes. Mike? Well, that's a great question. And I don't know that I have a totally acceptable answer other than lineages are important. And they're important to God, and they're important to his people. They're important to the Arab people. If we look at the conflict today, what is the conflict over? Well, land, which is part of the Abrahamic covenant. Land. And they're screaming from the river to the sea, meaning, right, from the Euphrates, not the Jordan, from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, meaning they want every Jew exterminated between those two borders, because they believe, as the progeny of the eldest son, which they would not know had we not had the genealogy, that land belongs to them, and the promises of Abraham belong to them. This is what they're fighting over, folks. Abraham's our father. Well, he's our father too. Well, we inherited the covenant. Well, you shouldn't have, because we're the eldest. And according to the Mosaic law, the eldest, right, is supposed to get that. Well, in this particular case, God said no. We don't accept that. And so here we are, right? So that's the only answer I got for you. And you could spiral into a lot of other different things based on lineage. But we will try not to do that. I am sorely tempted, but I will not. I'll try not to do that. All right, 17 and 18. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They dwelt from, and, well, it says that Abraham was gathered to his people. And now you're talking about heaven and Abraham's bosom. And in Luke 16, it's also referred to as paradise. So Ishmael is gathered to his people. That means he goes to heaven too? No. Right? Remember this little drawing here? Now this is the product of my mind, so take it with a grain of salt. I started it this way because there is a verse in the Bible that talks about the bottomless pit. What shape, what geometric shape does not have a bottom? In 3 dimensions, we call that an orb. Show me the bottom of a baseball. Show me the bottom of a basketball. So that's what got me on this train of thought. So, and we are dealing with the earth. Jesus said, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. Okay. Luke 16 is probably your major reference to what I'm going to show you. There are other references you should use to flesh in some of the other things I'm going to show you. But let's just assume the whole thing is the earth. And what I have drawn here is this place called Hades. That is Greek. In the Hebrew, it is often referred to as Sheol. And that's what we've got here. And it's located in the center of the earth. All right? Within that, this is the nested Russian doll motif. You know what that is? Where you take the top off a Russian doll and there's another doll inside. You take the top off that and there's another doll inside. Yeah, well, these are concentric circles. So this is a nested. All right, so within Hades, let's just go with Hades. By definition, the abode of the dead. When you die, when you physically die, whether you're a believer or an unbeliever, this is where you go. Okay. Correct. All right. We are in chapter 25 of Genesis, and we are talking about being gathered to your people. So, shoosh. She was a little nervous, that's all. All right. Yeah, that's a timeline issue, and I will address that after we're done here. So, this is Abraham's bosom. I put it on the outside because the closer to the center of the earth you get, the hotter it is. So this is the coolest chamber in Hades. This is a chasm. This is a no fire zone, no live zone. Nobody's here. It's a big gulf. It's a big gap between these two chambers. All right? Say again? Well, I do believe this is where that comes from. Because, well, we'll get to it. Don't let me forget to get to it, because I think it's important, and it speaks to what Janet might have been saying previously. This is this place we called hell. This is the abyss, and this is Tartaru. So they are all concentric circles, concentric orbs. One ball inside of another ball inside of another ball. That's how I envision this. So even though we're drawing it two-dimensionally, imagine these are orbs, the nested dolls. All right? So Abraham's bosom is also referred to as paradise. So when you take the scripture that says, just as the Son of Man, just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. And he turns to the thief on the cross and says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Where are they going? Right here. That's the way I understand it. Okay? All right. This is a place of comfort and ease and rest, and this is where the beggar wound up in the story in Luke 16. Then there's this chasm that separates hell from paradise. This is where the rich man went. It's a place of darkness and heat and torment and agony, the gnashing of teeth. The pain is such that all you can do is just grit your teeth. And he looks across the chasm, and amazingly to me, some people read right past it, but amazingly to me, the rich man recognizes Abraham across the chasm and calls him by name, Father Abraham. How's that work? I don't know. But Abraham says, what? He says, it's hot over here. Abraham says, yeah. Well, all I want is for Lazarus, which was the name of the beggar, all I want him to do is dip his finger in water and just touch my lips. And Abraham's response to him is, we can't do that. We can't come to you, and you can't come to us. Which speaks very violently to the fact that once you get here, you're here. All right. So, when Abraham is buried, gathered to his people, he's gathered to the believers here. When Ishmael is gathered to his people, he's gathered to his unbelieving people here. I wrote all of that to address that portion in Genesis. Now, before you ask, let me finish. I appreciate that, though. On the timeline, okay, so this is, here we have the cross, okay? The cross, Hebrews chapter 9, tells us the cross is the beginning of the new covenant and the end of the old covenant. The Old Testament does not end with Malachi and begin with Matthew. The old covenant ends at the cross. Hebrews chapter 9 will tell you that a covenant or a will does not go into effect until the one who wrote it dies. Jesus, the author of the new covenant, died at the cross. Therefore, this is the beginning of the new covenant. 40 days later, we have the ascension. I think it's Ephesians chapter 4 speaks to that, in that it says, what does it mean that he descended or ascended, except that he also descended? Oh, okay, that's what it means. And when he ascended 40 days after his resurrection, it says he took captivity captive, meaning, to me anyway, that he emptied Abraham's bosom and relocated paradise here. This is why Paul now says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Where is the Lord? Sitting at the right hand of the Father. Sitting at the right hand of the Father in the third heaven. Yeah, there are three. Okay. So, any questions? Any questions?
So paradise is in the third heaven.
Yes. Paradise has been relocated through the ascension of Jesus Christ, and as I understand it, the leading of captivity captive. He led the captivity captive, and gave gifts to men. Yeah. So if you moved from Manteca to Escalon, where would be home? Right. This is what occurred here. This is what occurred here. All right. If you, as a New Testament believer, think or even declare that at your death you will be gathered unto Abraham's bosom, would that be a correct statement? Sure. Why not? It has many names. Abraham's bosom, paradise. It now, because it's up here, is referred to as heaven. It wasn't heaven then, but it's heaven now. So now it means the same thing. Then it did not mean the same thing. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions? Joe. We have many people who are professors, who profess a knowledge of God, who profess a relationship of God. Turn on the TV. A lot of them live there. They're in it for the money. They're not in it for the gospel. They're in it for the cash. They're false teachers. They're wolves in sheep's clothing. And there will be a reckoning someday. Any other? Okay. No, lay it on us. Three heavens. Okay. So the Apostle Paul says, I once knew a man who was taken to the third heaven. Really? Okay. The other thing you need to know is that Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens. This word in the Hebrew is in the dual tense, meaning two. So in the beginning, God created two heavens. Paul says there are three. Okay? So these two heavens have been, by many theologians, described as, the atmosphere, the stratosphere, outer space, where the stars and the sun and the moon and the other galaxies live. And then there's the third heaven. And the third heaven is referred to as the abode of God. Because God is eternal, the place where he abides must also be eternal. Therefore, he didn't need to create it in Genesis 1:1, so he created the other two. Got any other questions on heaven? Our knowledge of heaven is What's the word I'm looking for? Minimal's a fine word. It's not the one. Anemic. We know a portion of the thimbleful of data that God has given us relative to heaven. And what we know of heaven mostly comes from John's visions of it, Ezekiel's visions of it. And when we read those visions, we scratch our head going, what are they trying to tell us? It would be like Abraham trying to explain a 747. It's an iron bird. It's an iron bird with chariot wheels. Right? Yeah. So when we look at these guys, and they have been through the auspices of God, given a glimpse of where He dwells, they struggle to describe it to us, and we struggle even further to try to understand what they're telling us. The thing that we take away, is the holiness of the location, the holiness of God's abode, and how far separated it is from our abode, our current temporary residence. And we know it's resident. We know it's temporary. We're not citizens of this place. We're not earth dwellers. We're ambassadors. We're sojourners. We're put here just for a little while to make the name of God known to those who don't know it, and to guard it from damage to those who say they do know it. And this is why we come to each other and we go, hey, you probably ought not to be doing that. Not for your sake, but for His sake. Not for your name, but for His name. There was a time in Moses' history where God looked at Moses and said, I've had it with these people. I'm going to erase them from existence, and I'll make a nation out of you. And Moses pleaded with him not to do that, less for the sake of the people, but mainly for the reputation of God's name, because the unbelievers are watching, and they're gonna know that you can't save your people, and it's going to damage your reputation. He wasn't concerned about these 3 million people that God was going to rub off the planet. He was concerned about God's reputation. And this is what I believe we need to be concerned with too. You had your hand up back there. Well, the question is the apostles. The statement, I think, was the apostles were shown heaven. And where did that happen? Is that what you're saying? Was that the question? Yeah, okay. So when you say the apostles, which I think I heard, that ain't right. Okay? Paul, yes. John, yes. The other 12. The only caveat to that might have been Peter, John, was it James at the Transfiguration when they beheld the glory of Christ? Maybe. Right? So it's not the apostles, but 2 of the apostles, or some of the apostles. Yeah. Capital A. Right. There's a difference between an apostle and an apostle. We are apostles. We are not apostles. There were 14 of them. There was no plan of succession for these apostles. Okay? Christ did not give us the authority that he gave them. And this is what some of those TV preachers do not understand. He gave them the ability. Paul and Peter have raised people from the dead. Any of us do that? No. You know why? We weren't given that authority. They were. And it's very specifically written out for us in the scriptures. There's no plan of succession for apostleship. Okay? We are all little a apostles, and what that word means is one who is sent. All right? We are disciples, meaning we are followers, meaning we are being taught. We are learning how to follow, so that we also might fulfill the role of apostles. Go. Okay? I saw another hand. Yes. Habakkuk 2:4. He's not a Christian, and neither is Abraham. Because the Christians, they were first called Christians in Antioch. That's in the book of Acts. All right? That's after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. So, what we need to do is adjust our thinking and readjust our terminology. And you do that with Habakkuk 2:4. No. And therein again is a wrong assumption. That's a wrong baseline. God is not sending anybody to hell. God is sparing a number of people from hell because we're all headed there. And this is why we are so glad that God is not fair. He is just. He's not fair. We don't want him to be fair. So you adjust your thinking. And it's hard to do because we live in this era. And you either are a Christian or you're not. Okay, so they weren't even called Christians when Christ was alive. Okay? So what were they called? Habakkuk 2:4. The just. That's exactly right. And so what justified Adam? Faith. Faith in what? Well, God says this covering of a fig leaf will not restore our relationship, but this covering of an animal skin will. I don't understand it, but I believe it. And it was credited to him as righteousness. God said, this time next year, you and her are going to have a son. And he looks at her and he goes, well, she passed menopause 30 years ago. But hey, if you say so, I believe you. And God credited his faith to him as righteousness. Okay? Now, all of that most definitely points forward to Christ. Because it is Christ who provides not the propitiation. What's the other word I'm looking for? Expiation. Thank you. This is why when you talk in the Old Testament about the Levitical sacrificial system, it was an external system. It did nothing to you internally. Did not change you internally. The covenant with Israel that would change them internally did not show up until the time of Jeremiah, chapter 31 to be specific, where he says, I will write a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So, these people's faith, and some folks call those the various dispensations, or the various economies, or the various ways God worked with his people. But it is always by faith. You are not justified before a holy God without faith. The book of Hebrews says it is impossible to please him apart from faith. So you always go back to Habakkuk 2:4. All right? So they weren't Christians. Were they people of faith? Yes. Were they justified before God? Yes. Did they believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Probably not. Now, in the case of Abraham, that may be exactly true, because the book of Galatians says that the gospel was preached to Abraham before time. When did that happen? You weren't here for that. Chapter 22. Right? Yeah. So the just shall live by faith. That's you and me. We are the thieves on the cross. I so love that Alistair Begg presentation. And if you haven't seen it, look it up. He talks about the thief on the cross. He says, I want to meet that guy one day, and I want to ask him, how'd that work out for you? Because you don't know anything about baptism. You don't know anything about justification by faith. You don't know anything about church membership, and yet you made it. How'd you make it? And he says, I don't know. And so when he gets queried or examined in heaven, and the entrance angel says, why are you here? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I don't know. Well, and Alistair does it great too. He goes, well, hang on, I'll go get my supervisor. And he says the supervisor angel shows up and says, by what authority are you here? You must have an understanding of the authority of Scripture. And there's nothing from the thief on the cross. And the supervisor angel says, so then on what authority are you even here? And the thief on the cross's response is your response and my response, and none other. Because the man on the middle cross said I could come. That's it. That's faith. Okay? All right. Any other questions on this mess here? Ron? You go right ahead. All right, that's right. That's right here. Okay? And that is the sole provision of God. The prayers of a righteous man are effectual, right? Okay, because we are asking God in His power and authority to raise the dead or to cure them from cancer, right? Okay, these guys, in at least 2 of the synoptic gospels, Jesus pulled the 12 aside and said, I now give you authority to heal the sick, give sight to the blind, grow ears, hearing you right. Who did he give that authority to? The 12, meaning Judas Iscariot as well. He didn't give that authority to me or to you, right? So people were healed by touching Paul and touching Peter and touching these guys, not you and me. So these guys on the TV that are doing this are liars. They're charlatans, they're fakes, they're phonies, they are false teachers, and I have a few other names I can't repeat in mixed company. They're lying. They're lying, and they're bringing damnation not only on themselves, but the people that they are dealing with. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. It's like one of my favorite Bible teachers referred to the old covenant as weak and ineffective. Now, I don't know what was in his heart when he said that. I'd like to talk to him about it. But I am telling you that if you think the old covenant was weak and ineffective because it couldn't save, then you don't know what the old covenant is about. It was never intended to save. It was intended to scare the hell out of you and have you run screaming to Jesus Christ, who is the only salvation. And in that regard, it did its job perfectly, right? It's referred to in the Bible as a tutor, a harsh schoolmaster, which takes out the cane and canes your butt all the way from here to where you need to be, which is where? The cross. Because I can't save you. If you have any doubt of that, Moses is the figurehead for the law, right? The law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. Who did not make it to the promised land? The law. Okay? We have not been given the authority to do this, to reach out and touch somebody and heal them like these people were given the authority. We have the authority to come to the Father. Absolutely. And does God heal? Absolutely. Are there healings today? Absolutely. But watch these liars and these charlatans on TV, and they heal somebody from a buzzing in their head. Please, show me the guy who grew an arm. Right? Show me that guy. Because these guys could show you that. Just like Christ grew that ear back on that servant. These guys can do that. And Peter and Paul raised people from the dead. These guys aren't doing that because they don't have the authority to do that. And yet they're trying to convince you and me that they do. Wrong answer all day long. Wrong answer. So, well, in verse 20, we see that Rebekah is barren. And Isaac has prayed for 20 years. And he did not do what his father did, right? Marry a concubine. He continued to wait. That's Bible time. We get to wait on Bible time, not, hey, I got a roast in the oven. Let's get this, right? Yeah. So that's, I tend to be opinionated and demonstrative toward false teachers and hired shepherds. They're not looking out for the sheep, they're looking out for themselves. One of these guys lives in a $10.5 million home. And he says there's nothing wrong with having a nice place to live. Nice place to live? Private jets, yeah, it just gets me fired up. Any other questions? Purgatory. Okay. So this place, thank you, Mike. This place here, because either this is gone and this is gone and this whole place is hell, or this is still here and this is empty. I don't know. God may have had to expand, right? Blow out some walls and make some more room since Luke 16. I don't know. But this place here is a temporary place. Because this place here is one of the 7 things listed in the last chapters of Revelation that are thrown into the lake of fire. Huh? No. The lake of fire is way out here in the outer darkness. So, if you can imagine God taking this place and putting it in the outer darkness, as far away from his sight as possible, that might be an accurate picture with this caveat. We talk about people in here being separated from God. By that, we have to understand that that separation is a relational separation. They are not physically separated from God. We serve an omnipresent God. So, what that means is that in hell, in the lake of fire, God is there. What's he doing? Pouring out his wrath on the inhabitants for eternity. Whew. So you and I, this is kind of off the subject, but it's not. You and I are looking for resurrection bodies, right? Resurrection bodies. Incorruptible, because this is corruptible. We're looking for incorruptible bodies. Why? So that we might live here throughout all eternity. Because these won't last that long. Right? Okay. These people, this is strictly my opinion. These people here also get resurrection bodies so that they might live an eternity here. Because these will not suffer the flames of God's wrath. Now, I don't know about you, but the hair stand up on my arms. Okay, well, we didn't finish chapter 5, but that's quite all right. Any other questions? The questions are great. Jose? Okay, all right. So, again, and great question. Remember, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Where is the Lord? Sitting at the right seat of God the Father in the third heaven. To be absent from this temporary tent is to be where? Yeah, you are here. You are very welcome. Denon, do you have a question?
So it's documented when those 12 apostles or 12 disciples are given the authority.
Yes.
And those other two are Paul and Barnabas, right?
No. You got half credit. Matthias. All right? Matthias placed Judas Iscariot.
Is that documented or is it just like...
Absolutely it is. Absolutely is. And Paul claims his apostleship because he was taught face to face by the resurrected Christ 3 years in the Arabian desert. That's documented too. You also see every single one of his epistles begins this way. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. And then he greets you and I the same way. Grace and peace. In that order. Specifically in that order. Because grace always comes first. There is no peace unless there has first been grace. That help? Okay. And your dad can help you find those references. If he can't, you all have my number. All right. Any other questions? All right. I love the questions, obviously. We are way past time. All right. Thank you for coming.